For what it's worth, Ryan is going to be the CEO. My voice echoed through the newly renovated lobby, a space I had spent months designing with a fresh, modern mountain aesthetic. It was supposed to feel like home, warm yet refined. But the chill in my mother's tone cut through all of that. Her condescending wave felt like a slap disguised as a handshake. "My darling Claire," she began, her words carefully chosen to sting. "Leadership just comes more naturally to your brother. You, on the other hand, have a real knack for the little things, details." She said it like she was explaining a simple fact to a child. That's when Ryan strolled up, hands in his pockets, wearing that smug grin I remembered from childhood. "Hey there, sister," he said with a wink, like we were still playing pretend in the backyard. I've always believed someone needs to manage the bigger picture, not just the paperwork. And that's exactly what I was doing, until they decided otherwise. "Hi, I'm Claire Anderson, and I never imagined I'd be fighting for recognition in my own company after 2 decades in the hospitality industry. With years of experience managing high-end hotels in Chicago, I gave up everything to come back to Colorado and help rescue the family business, Mountain Pine Lodge. Nobody else had real hospitality experience. Ryan? He'd jumped from job to job, never lasting more than a year. Meanwhile, I was fielding a teary call from Dad 8 months ago. "Claire, we're weeks from bankruptcy," he'd whispered. I sold my condo in Chicago, used every bit of my savings to buy a modest home nearby, and came running. The lodge was trapped in time. Outdated decor, no website, bad reviews. It broke my heart. I poured myself into fixing it. Day and night, I reworked everything, from the lobby and reservation system to retraining staff and negotiating with suppliers. I tapped into every contact I'd made over the years to land travel magazine features, corporate partnerships, even art exhibits showcasing local artists. The transformation was astounding. Once a 2-star lodge teetering on failure, Mountain Pine became a hidden gem. Reservations doubled, word of mouth exploded. We were finally seeing real momentum. And then Ryan showed up, smirking, smug, acting like he owned the place. I stood there, forced to watch as my parents handed him everything I had rebuilt. None of it seemed to matter. My work, my sacrifice, the results. They were promoting him to CEO at the next staff meeting. On the same day, I was scheduled to present record-breaking quarterly numbers. My co-workers noticed. Sarah, our head housekeeper and someone who had been there as long as I had, looked at me with quiet fury. Everyone knew who'd done the real work. Was this fair? Was this normal? Let me take you back, so you understand how deeply rooted this all is. Mountain Pine Lodge wasn't just a hotel. It was family. Built in 1971 by my grandmother, passed down through generations. I spent my childhood here, learning the ins and outs of the business while other kids were playing. I watched Mum manage guests and Dad fix boilers. I loved it all. 3 years ago, Ryan was different. He was older than me, but completely uninterested in the family business. He bounced between majors, design, then business, then nothing, dropped out. Mum and Dad brushed it off. "He's just creative," they'd say. "Needs time." Meanwhile, I worked my way up in Chicago, rising through the ranks to regional director of a major hotel chain. And every time I shared a milestone, the praise from home was faint, polite at best. "That's great, honey, but when are you coming back?" They never let me feel like enough. When I finally returned and saw the hotel's dire state, I knew it needed a complete overhaul, physically and financially. Outdated systems, poor marketing, plummeting guest satisfaction. So I went all in. I replaced the broken equipment, retrained the front desk team, reworked our pricing model, updated the branding, and launched new promotions. I even replaced the carpet in the lobby. Every dollar spent was carefully budgeted. And Ryan? Absent. He was networking in Denver, basically partying, from what I could gather. Occasionally, he'd show up at family dinners with vague ideas about modernising the vibe. My parents treated every half-baked suggestion like gold, but I kept going, telling myself the results would speak for themselves. They had to. More bookings, better reviews, higher revenue. I thought I'd finally earned my parents' approval. But that illusion shattered when Ryan waltzed in like a boss, cutting the breakfast buffet without consulting me. He didn't care that guests loved it or that it boosted our ratings. "It's a cost issue," he said flatly, waving off my concerns. Then came the final straw. This morning, I walked it in and found out he'd fired Louise, our head of military laundry. She'd worked here 15 years. His reason? She wasn't adjusting fast enough to his new time-tracking software. It was peak checkout time. We were already short-staffed. I barely managed to talk her into staying. I turned to my parents, spreadsheets in hand, hoping to show them the progress we'd made, guest satisfaction, revenue, future projections. Dad just sipped his coffee in silence. Mum gently touched my hand. "Sweetheart, you have to give your brother some space. He has such wonderful ideas." Wonderful ideas? I felt like I was suffocating. Later that day, I drove past the old Riverside Lodge. It used to be our biggest competition. Now it sat half empty, neglected, but the location was perfect, closer to the ski resorts, with breathtaking views, and suddenly I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called a real estate agent that same day. The next morning, I pulled into the empty lot behind the Riverside Lodge, where the owners once parked their cars. The building wasn't in great shape, but I saw its potential. I sat there for over an hour just staring at that weathered sign. All the memories, the work, the betrayal, it all circled around me like a storm. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I called my agent again. "I want to see the inside first thing tomorrow." And when I walked through those tired halls and peeling walls, I didn't see a run-down lodge. I saw a clean slate. A space where I could build something from the ground up without having to fight for permission, without having to prove anything to anyone. Thanks to my savings and solid credit, the deal went through quickly. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. While Ryan basked in the glow of family praise at Mountain Pine Lodge, I poured myself into transforming Riverside. For the next 3 months, I barely came up for air. I worked side by side with contractors to gut outdated rooms, redesign common areas, and build something fresh. I called in favours from former colleagues, recruited top-tier hospitality pros, and hand-picked every detail, from the linens to the lighting. We called it the Summit. Maybe a little on the nose, but I didn't care. I wanted people to know that I was aiming for the top. Word spread fast. Some said I was being spiteful, competing with my own family. But others, especially former co-workers from Mountain Pine, quietly rooted for me. They'd seen what I was capable of. They knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back something I had poured my soul into. My parents, of course, were not pleased. "How could you do this to your brother?" Mum asked over dinner one night, her fork barely touched. "To us?" I just smiled, changed the subject, and went back to my risotto. Meanwhile, Mountain Pine Lodge was starting to crack. Guest reviews began to slip. Long-time employees were quitting. People I had trained, mentored, cared for. Sarah, our housekeeper, sent me a message one night. "It's chaos here," she wrote. "He doesn't listen. He cuts corners. People are burned out." I wasn't surprised. They'd given him everything, and now they were watching it fall apart. I stayed focused, kept building. On the day of the Summit's soft launch, exactly 6 months after Ryan's promotion, I stood in the lobby, watching guests walk through the doors with wide eyes and smiles. Local press snapped pictures, couples posed near the fireplace, and my parents, well, they showed up too. Mum tried to act surprised. Dad nodded stiffly. Ryan, though, his face was tight with anger. "This is an attack," he whispered to me at the bar. "You're trying to destroy us." I simply smiled. "No, Ryan, I'm just thriving." And I was. The differences between our two hotels became impossible to ignore. Mountain Pine was struggling with basic maintenance. The Summit, meanwhile, buzzed with energy. Guests raved about our spa services, locally sourced food, and sustainable programs. Everything I had once imagined for the family hotel, but had been denied, was real here. Success, however, came with its own challenges. Some of our long-time supporters felt torn. Friends I'd grown up with stopped calling. I overheard whispers around town, people accusing me of abandoning family or showing off. The local tourism board quietly dropped me from a few committees. When I showed up for our usual coffee meetups, familiar faces avoided eye contact. Vendors hesitated to renew contracts. It stung, but I refused to let it break me. I reached out to Denver partners, forged new relationships with ski tour companies, and stayed focused on what mattered, building something that lasted. Every obstacle just made me work harder, think smarter. And then, the moment I never expected came. My parents showed up at my office. Their faces were pale, their voices quiet. "Claire," Mum said, clutching her purse, "the bank is threatening to call the loan on Mountain Pine. Ryan, he's in over his head. We need your help." I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and took a breath. "I offered to help months ago," I said calmly. "You chose Ryan. Now you need to live with that choice." Dad looked worn, like he'd aged 10 years. 10 cut. "Think about your grandfather's legacy," he said, barely above a whisper. "This hotel has been in our family for generations." "And I tried to protect that legacy," I replied. "But you handed it to someone who treated it like a toy." Their silence was telling. I saw the desperation in Mom's eyes, but I didn't flinch. "You want my advice?" I said finally. "I can help with vendor suggestions, maybe a staff training program, but I'm not coming back to fix Ryan's mess. That's not my responsibility anymore." They left quietly. No more arguments. No guilt tripping. Just silence. And that silence, it was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in me. I stopped needing their approval. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped chasing their love like a lost child. I poured that energy into my team, my new family. Many of them had left Mountain Pine behind and now thrived at the Summit. People like Sarah and Maria, who had once been overlooked, were now department leads. They finally felt valued, and I finally felt free. When Colorado's Premier Hotel Awards were announced, the Summit was nominated for Best New Boutique Hotel. Mountain Pine Lodge didn't even make the list. I sat with my team at the ceremony, hands clasped tightly in my lap. When our name was called, the room erupted. I walked to the stage, heart pounding, eyes shining. As I accepted the award, I saw my parents standing at the back of the room. Mum looked like she was holding back tears. Dad gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Ryan wasn't there. I didn't need him to be. I didn't go over to them after the ceremony. It wasn't out of anger. It wasn't pride either. It just didn't feel necessary anymore. Instead, I clinked glasses with my team, thanked them, and shared a few quiet words about the journey. I mentioned Mountain Pine Lodge just once, and gently. I spoke of it as the place where I learned to love hospitality, where I first understood how much joy a well-run hotel could bring people. Some in the audience caught the subtle nod. A few looked uncomfortable. They understood what I meant. After the event, a magazine editor approached me. She had been following the Summit's progress and wanted to feature our story. As we chatted about the renovation, the hiring process, and the design philosophy behind the hotel, my parents lingered in the background, close enough to hear bits and pieces of my words. Each time I mentioned how I had been passed over for the CEO role, I noticed Mum flinch ever so slightly. I wasn't trying to rub salt in old wounds, but I was no longer hiding my truth. Later that day, the magazine confirmed the article would be a full feature. The title, How the Summit Rose from Rejection to Reinvention in the Rockies. It was like a spark lit the town on fire. People who once whispered that I was vindictive now saw things differently. The article painted a clear picture. Mountain Pine's decline was no accident, and my success wasn't a fluke. It was built with intention, hard work, and heart. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, knowing that my parents had to read about my accomplishments in a glossy spread rather than witnessing them firsthand. But by then, I'd come to terms with something deeper. Their praise, their approval. I didn't need it anymore. What I needed was peace, and I had found it. That peace began to grow in unexpected ways. Sarah and Maria, two of the most loyal staff from my Mountain Pine days, told me one afternoon that working at the summit had given them back their passion. "You listen to us," Sarah said. "You see us." It was simple, and it meant everything. That acknowledgement reminded me why I'd returned to hospitality in the first place, not for applause or headlines, but to build places where people felt cared for, where comfort met dignity. In time, I began reconnecting with parts of my life I had left behind. I went on hiking trips with old friends. I sat for long coffee dates in town without looking over my shoulder. Even those who had once judged me for turning against my family now greeted me with warmth. I hadn't set out to compete. I had simply refused to shrink myself for people who didn't see my worth. The summit began to host charity events, starting with a fundraiser for the local animal shelter. The energy in the room that night was electric. Laughter, purpose, and community all in one space. I looked around and thought, this is it. This is why I do this. But still, there were quiet nights when memories of my parents and Ryan crept in. I'd wonder, did they ever really see me? Did they understand the weight of their choices? And then, just a few weeks after the awards ceremony, they reached out. They invited me to dinner. Just me. I wasn't sure what to expect. A trap? A guilt trip? Another plea? Still, I went. When I walked into their home, everything felt off. Mum greeted me with a tight smile. Dad barely looked up from his glass. We ate in strained silence, chatting about the weather, the garden, anything but what mattered. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Claire," he said, "we're proud of what you've built." Mum nodded quickly. "Yes, dear. We should have said it sooner. You've done something exceptional." Joie, their words hung in the air like perfume. Pleasant, but too late. I gave a faint smile, waiting. I already knew what was coming. And, sure enough, Mom's tone shifted. "Ryan's having a hard time. The hotel is struggling more than ever. He's overwhelmed. We were wondering if you'd consider helping." My stomach clenched. I studied them both. Mum, sipping her wine with freshly manicured fingers, eyes glancing away. Dad, staring at the tablecloth like it might offer him a better script. "I tried to help," I said softly. "A year ago, you didn't want my help then." They didn't argue. "I spent months pulling Mountain Pine back from the edge," I continued, "and you gave it to someone unprepared, someone who never wanted it until it was fixed. Now, they wanted me to clean it up again?" "No." I raised my hand gently as Mum started to respond. "If you'd like suggestions, I'll share my contacts, vendors, training resources, maybe even a consultant I trust. But I'm not coming back." "Oh, Roger." Their faces fell. They didn't understand. Not completely. But they didn't fight me either. That in itself was progress. As I drove home that night, something inside me felt lighter. I'd drawn a line, and this time I hadn't stepped over it for their sake. The following weeks were filled with more growth. I kept my focus on the future, stopped over-explaining my choices, stopped apologising for putting myself first. I watched Mountain Pine's reviews continue to dip while the summit was now getting calls from boutique hotel owners across the region. Some wanted partnerships, others asked for mentorship, And no, I didn't gloat, but I did allow myself to feel proud. The summit wasn't just a hotel. It was the embodiment of every overlooked effort, every late night, every silent tear I had shed. It was my second chance, and I had built it without them. The summit had become the sum of all my hard work, my grit, my vision, every hallway, every polished fixture, every happy guest. It all told the story I had once tried so hard to share with my family. Now, I no longer needed them to hear it. Instead, I poured my energy into nurturing what I'd built. I took early morning walks through the lobby, greeting staff with a warm smile, taking note of fresh flowers, the scent of brewed coffee drifting through the mountain air. Guests chatted cheerfully near the fireplace, making plans for ski trips or spa visits. The space thrived not just in numbers but in spirit, and I had never felt more at peace. Sarah and Maria, two of my most trusted team leaders, became like sisters to me. Both had left Mountain Pine when it became unbearable under Ryan's management. At the summit, their talents flourished. They felt seen, they mattered. And they told me, often, how grateful they were to be part of something where loyalty and care meant something again. One afternoon, Sarah pulled me aside. Her eyes glistened. "For the first time in my career," she said, "I feel like my opinion counts. Thank you for giving me that." That moment stayed with me. I'd spent so long chasing validation from the wrong people. Now, I was surrounded by those who saw me, who believed in what I was building, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Even outside the hotel, things shifted. I began reconnecting with old friends I'd lost during the rocky transition. People who had once questioned my motives were now reaching out to host events at the summit. I found myself saying yes more often, to lunch invites, community hikes, even quiet evenings of wine and storytelling with locals I hadn't spoken to in years. We recently hosted a fundraiser for the local animal shelter in our new event space. Watching neighbours, volunteers and guests come together for a shared cause reminded me why I had fallen in love with hospitality in the first place. It wasn't about power or recognition, it was about connection, comfort and care. But no matter how much healing happened, there were still quiet nights when my thoughts returned to my family. Ryan, especially. I hadn't seen or spoken to him since that awkward dinner at our parents' house. He had disappeared from industry events, and word around town was that Mountain Pine was still struggling. Sometimes I wondered if he regretted anything. But deep down, I knew I might never get that answer, and I was learning to live with that. About 3 weeks after the summit won the state's top boutique hotel award, my parents reached out again. They wanted to have dinner, with just the three of us this time. I was hesitant, but something inside me said go. Not out of obligation, not out of hope, but because I needed to hear what they had to say, and more importantly, I needed to hear myself say what I had held in for years. When I arrived at their home, the air felt different, a little heavier, a little quieter. Mum opened the door with a forced smile. Dad gave a quick nod. The table was already set, the wine already poured. We made small talk at first, weather, town gossip, a few awkward jokes. But then Dad cleared his throat and the air changed again. "Claire," he began, "we've been meaning to tell you. We are proud of you. Truly. The summit is something incredible." Mum jumped in quickly. "We know we haven't always shown it. We're sorry." The words sounded rehearsed, but there was a tremble in her voice that made me pause. I nodded slowly. "Thank you." But I didn't say much more. I was waiting, because I knew there was something else. Sure enough, after a few moments of silence, Mum looked down at her plate. "Ryan's not doing well," she whispered. "The hotel's falling apart. He's overwhelmed. We were wondering if you'd consider helping, maybe just to guide him through the next few months." I set down my fork, took a breath and looked at both of them. "No," I said gently. I won't come back to fix what he's broken. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Mum's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't protest. I tried, I continued. A long time ago, I offered help. I worked myself to the bone for this family, and I was told I wasn't enough. That Ryan deserved the title, the credit, the hotel. They didn't argue. I've built something of my own now, I said softly. Something I'm proud of. And I did it without your blessing. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. If you want my advice, I'll give it. If you want referrals, training ideas, I'll share them. But I won't return, and I won't carry his burdens. They didn't stop me. That night, driving home through the winding mountain roads, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace without pain. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. I turned down their follow-up calls, not out of spite, but because I needed space. And in that space, something beautiful happened. I began dreaming again, not about fixing what was broken, but about what came next. We started planning a second location, another summit, this time near the lake, just north of Aspen. The blueprint was bold, fresh, alive with potential, just like me. And even though Ryan and I still hadn't spoken, I wasn't bitter. I didn't need him to acknowledge what had happened. I no longer needed to win the approval I once begged for. The summit had become my answer. It was proof that I could rise, even after being overlooked, even after being dismissed by the people I loved most. One crisp morning, I stood in the lobby watching the sunrise pour through the tall windows, casting golden light over the hardwood floors and the smiles of passing guests. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who worked late into the night trying to earn a well done that never came. And I realized I didn't need it anymore. I had built a place where I belonged, a life full of warmth, of meaning, of people who saw me for who I truly was, not someone's second choice, not someone's backup plan, just me. Claire Anderson, founder of the summit. And finally, I was enough. Sometimes the people we expect to support us the most are the very ones who overlook us. Claire's journey is a powerful reminder that recognition doesn't always come from family, and that's okay. What matters more is the belief we hold in ourselves and the courage to build something meaningful without waiting for others to approve. She spent years proving her worth, only to be passed over. But instead of giving in to bitterness, she redirected her energy into creating something of her own. And through that choice, she found more than success. She found peace. For anyone who's ever felt unappreciated, undervalued, or sidelined by the people they love, this story speaks directly to your heart. You are not defined by their silence or their judgment. You are defined by the strength it takes to rise anyway. Have you ever had to walk away from something or someone in order to find your peace? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through struggle. Your voice matters here. You're not alone, and we're listening.